Imagine being 13-year-old Elijah, an African-American boy sitting in Miss Taylor's class in ELA class in Greenville School District. Elijah is excited to dive into the history of race and racism in America. But as he walks into class, he notices Miss Taylor's somber expression. As he takes his seat, she announces to the class that the book stamped by Ibram Kendi and Jason Reynolds, which Elijah was excited to dive into, has been banned. From what Elijah has heard about the book Stamp, it's a book written for younger audiences and discusses the history of race and racism in America and the way that race continues to shape society today. Elijah is confused and raises his hand to understand what a book ban is. Ms. Taylor says book banning happens when schools are told that they can't let people read a certain book. Usually it's because the book is too controversial, upsetting, or dangerous. Elijah's mind begins to race. Dangerous? What? How can a book be dangerous? Especially a book that has history that is important for all of us to know. He then looks around the class to see how others are feeling. He sees some students looking sad, others with furrowed brows, and other students just focusing on their assignments. But why, he blurts out, why would they want to take books away from us? And then he notices Ms. Taylor's hesitancy as she looks back and forth towards the door. Ms. Taylor then says, because sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand. So instead of learning, they choose to silence. Elijah then shrinks in his seat. He's always been eager to learn. His dad always says that learning about history is important, but now, is he supposed to feel bad? Is this book bad? Ms. Taylor then places the book on her desk where it will remain unread. And a strange feeling takes over the class. This isn't just about the book stamped. It's about who gets to decide what stories are told and who gets to hear them. My name is Dr. Sheretta Butler-Barnes. As a developmental psychologist over the past 15 years, I've been researching how Black youth leverage their personal and cultural assets to thrive in the face of challenges to their identity stemming from institutional, individual, and cultural experiences of racism. For youth to develop a healthy identity, it is imperative that they see characters who look like them and characters who share their experiences. Book banning can often communicate to a child that their identity is unwelcome. It can also send messages to children that their identity is unaccepted or not valued. Book banning often reflects people's fears as opposed to what children actually need, and prevents the opportunity from children to learn about themselves and also from learning about others. And so before I begin, I want to provide some definitions and some examples of what book banning and book removal are. Book banning is the process of removing, restricting, or challenging access to a book across K through 12 or libraries. The reasons usually stem from a book being too controversial, to the appropriateness of the book, to concerns about the discussions of controversial topics. Right here in Missouri, 2 school districts banned 315 books between July and December of 2022, with one of these school districts banning over 65% of these books. This means that Missouri is currently ranked 3rd in the nation behind Florida and Texas with regards to book banning. Most of the books that are banned are those that center LGBTQ content and those that have writings by authors of color. In terms of ranking, a survey found that the #1 reason that books were challenged in 2021 was because of LGBT content. Also, since 2021, there has been a rise in book banning by 128% since 2021. Now that we know what book banning is, while book banning can involve removal of a book removal is a distinct process. Schools can officially withdraw a book from school curricula or libraries. For example, Right here in Missouri, books were pulled about the Holocaust, including Maus and the Diary of Anne Frank due to state law. Missouri Senate Bill 775, which became law in August of 2022, requires school districts to remove any explicit sexual content from curricula or any material deemed inappropriate. Now, while this is understandable, this has left the decision to individual school districts. And as a result, school districts have been erring on the side of caution by removing books with any potentially sensitive content, including those about the Holocaust. Another example is All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson. This book details the journey of a Black queer individuals, their experiences with their gender identity and their sexuality. Any educator found to be in violation of this law will be threatened with jail time. This also highlights the increasing restrictions around educational freedom. Now, to understand the growing issues of book banning, it's important that we consider the historical context. Book banning has a long history dating back to around 240 BC. The Chinese emperor Shi Huangdi buried 460 Confucian scholars alive to control how history was written. He burned all the books in his kingdom. He kept only one copy for his royal library, and even those were destroyed before his death. These books included poetry, history, and philosophy. The fear was that knowledge could potentially lead to rebellion and people questioning the dominant political ideology. Books like medicine, pharmacy, or agriculture were allowed to remain in the hands of the people. However, to achieve political unification, those books that discuss diversity of thought were destroyed. Now, fast forwarding in history to the US, one of the earliest examples of book banning was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. This book was banned because of its pro-abolitionist content and because of the vivid depictions of the atrocities of slavery and the brutal realities of the lives of enslaved African Americans. In response to this, Confederate states throughout the South enacted strict laws prohibiting any possession of abolitionist literature. This thinking even extended to non-Confederate states. For example, in Maryland, laws against anti-slavery literature were strictly enforced, as in the case of Samuel Green. Samuel Green, a free Black minister in 1857, was convicted of possessing a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released after serving 5 years. This is the first time in history that anyone was convicted of such a crime. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it highlighted the suppression of anti-slavery thought. It highlighted the suppression of Black literacy. And also it highlighted the fact that even challenging the institution of slavery could be considered a crime. But the fight wouldn't stop there, as later court cases would still be in debate about people's access to the right to read. And following were two such cases. First, the United States versus one book called Ulysses in 1933 ruled that the depiction of sex should be allowed in serious literature, even if offensive to others, advocating for people's right to read. This ruling was seminal in that it highlighted the deviation from Victorian notions of what decency should be like. In another case, we have Island Tree School District versus Pico in 1982. This was led by students who felt that their First Amendment rights were being violated by a local school board who removed books because the school board felt that the books were anti-Christian or anti-American. An example of this is Langston Hughes' best short story by Negro writers. However, the ruling was in favor of the students, and the courts ruled that school officials cannot remove books based on their political ideology or their partisan stance, and that school libraries offered a space for intellectual freedom and discovery. It also highlighted the fact that school libraries are a place for learning and exploration, and that students should have the access to have diversity to read. So now that we understand a little bit about book banning history, let's talk a little bit about why books get banned. Why censorship? What's the common denominator? Well, statistics show that majority of the banned books center LGBTQ themes and social concerns like racism and sexism. According to the American Library Association, between 2020 to 2023, the 10 most challenged books included Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe, All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and Stamped by Ibram Kendi and Jason Reynolds. The ongoing controversy of these books highlights the challenge with representation and who gets to have access to read. And so to understand this, it's important that we draw on historical research to understand the impact of representation and self-perception. And one of the seminal studies to do this was the Dow study. This famous study was led by Doctors Kenneth B. Clark and Mamie P. Clark in the late 1940s. Their research revealed the negative impact of racial segregation on self-esteem and self-worth with Black children. Here, children were presented with two dolls, one white, one Black doll. Black children were instructed to select a doll that they preferred and to assign positive or negative traits to the doll that they preferred. And for example, children were asked questions such as, give me the nice doll. Give me the doll that has a nice color. Give me the doll that looks like you. And give me the doll that is bad. And the research findings revealed that Black children preferred white dolls and that they assigned more positive attributes to white dolls, indicating the negative impact of racial segregation on their self-worth. Now let's go back to 13-year-old Elijah, a 13-year-old African-American boy who was excited to read Stamped. What might this mean for him? How might Elijah feel if he knew that the books that were primarily being banned were by authors of color? Also, what message is this sending to children who have friends from marginalized communities? The connection between the book ban study and the Dow study is one of representation. Book bans restrict access to diversity. Book bans, particularly those works targeting work by and for authors of color or marginalized communities, reinforce harmful messages by erasure of diverse voices. This also prevents the opportunity for us to learn about the strengths and challenges of these communities. Now, moving further, other studies have found that book banning also harms identity formation. Researchers like Tylinda find that the erasure of LGBTQ themes and content could lead to a rise in anti-LGBT legislation and policy. This could also increase bullying and discrimination, leading to children feeling like their identities are not welcome. This can also lead to queer children feeling stigma and silence, leading to lower levels of self-esteem and them feeling like they're not accepted or valued. Book banning restricts access to diversity, equity, and inclusion materials and prevents us the opportunity to learn about the strengths and challenges of queer communities. This continues to perpetuate harmful stereotypes. And then you have other scholars like Solano and colleagues who find that book banning is not only harmful for children of color, but for all children. For children of color, it prevents the opportunity to develop a healthy racial pride and the ability to cope with bias. But for white children, it can reduce access to multicultural characters, multicultural content, and this reinforces the negative stereotypes they hold about people of color. In my own research, I asked Black parents about their views about book banning. I asked them about their views about racism and racial history being taught in the classroom, and also bias in teaching. And the findings revealed that Black parents who were worried about history being taught in an incorrect or biased way reported higher levels of racial trauma. So in order to continue to understand the impact of book banning, We have to turn to social science. Why does social science matter? Social science matters because it helps us understand the political, societal, and psychological impact of book banning. Through research, we can examine how book banning is associated with self-esteem and self-worth. In addition to social science research, we can use education and open dialogue and include diverse perspectives to understand the harmful censorship of book banning and what those things mean. This impacts communities, and it's imperative that we find out how these things are happening. In addition to the ways that we can continue to address, we have to take action to make sure that all children's voices are heard. We have to make sure that they have access to diverse and inclusive literature. We know that representation matters. To navigate and to create a just society, we have to learn from the past. Truth-telling, inclusive storytelling is essential to affirm intersecting social identities. Everybody's story deserves to be heard. Truth-telling matters. And so how do we ensure this? Well, we do a couple of things. We can build community. We can partner with folks who have the same vision as we do. We can partner with friends, family, neighbors, our local communities to bring reading to children. We can also, through community building, we can link with people with common interests and common goals to make sure that all voices are heard. Right here in Missouri, we can also create little free libraries. For example, Kansas City have over 70 little free libraries. Busey Bank here in St. Louis have little free library locations throughout the city. Also, our organizations of the Divine Nine have led the way through their literacy efforts in creating little free libraries. We can also partner with our local bookstores and create book clubs. For example, In-Purpose Educational Services in partnership with ICME, an African-American bookstore here in St. Louis, has a banned book list program where they give books to the community for free. We could also partner with Left Bank's bookstore here. They have a banned list program through their Literacy and Justice Project. They bring reading to children, and these books are accessible for free. We also need to center the voices of children, youth, and families when policies and bills are introduced so that they can understand what's going on. But more specifically, we need to center youth because we need to hear their attitudes and beliefs and share these with our decision makers. When we erase words, we erase worlds. We prevent the opportunity to learn from the past, we prevent the opportunity to do better, and we prevent the opportunity to grow. Censorship stifles progress. It is essential that we protect the right to read, that we are intentionally including diverse perspectives, and that we're engaging in meaningful discourse. And so how do we do this? We can advocate for inclusive education. We can empower students and educators in our school districts. We can partner with libraries and our local bookstores that are fighting the efforts in censorship. And when we're sitting at the table, we can make sure that everybody's included because representation matters. All of this is part of communal bonding and is necessary to create a just and equitable society. Thank you.